The merchant trembled as his competitor's empire crumbled before his eyes. Not through violence or sabotage, not through lies or betrayal, but through something far more devastating: complete superiority. What happens when you don't just defeat your enemy, but make their very existence irrelevant? Today's story takes us to medieval Milan, where silk merchants waged battles that could destroy entire family legacies. We will witness how a young trader discovered that half measures in competition invite endless retaliation when facing a ruthless rival who had crushed every challenger for over a decade. With a lesson he learned from studying failed competitors, he would develop a strategy so comprehensive that victory became not just complete, but permanent. This story will reveal the most decisive secret of competitive warfare, a secret discovered 600 years ago, but still used by the most dominant companies and leaders in today's marketplace. It is not those who wound their enemies who achieve lasting victory, but those who make their competitors' weapons useless, their strategies obsolete, and their very presence unnecessary. In the sun-drenched piazzas of medieval Milan, where silk merchants competed beneath marble arcades and every transaction carried the weight of family honor, there lived a truth more decisive than any battlefield strategy. In a world where half measures invite retaliation, the one who achieves complete victory through legitimate means ensures that defeated competitors cannot rise again to threaten future prosperity. For when merchants and craftsmen, bankers and traders all engage in commercial warfare, the wise understand that thorough success built on ethical foundations creates lasting security that partial victories never provide. The year was 1402, and Milan had emerged as one of Europe's most dynamic commercial centers, a city where the Visconti family's patronage had created unprecedented opportunities for ambitious merchants willing to compete in increasingly sophisticated markets. Within this world of expanding trade and fierce competition, a young silk merchant named Alessandro Torriani faced a challenge that would test not only his business acumen, but his understanding of how complete competitive victory could be achieved through superior strategy rather than unethical practices. At 29, Alessandro possessed the technical knowledge that marked him as competent in Milan's complex silk trade. He understood quality assessment, had developed relationships with reliable suppliers in the Eastern Mediterranean, and possessed the analytical skills needed to identify profitable opportunities in the seasonal fluctuations of luxury demand. But he had also inherited a problem that threatened to destroy everything he had worked to build: a ruthless competitor named Giuliano Medici, whose family's banking connections and willingness to use questionable tactics had enabled him to dominate Milan's silk market for over a decade. Giuliano's approach to competition was systematic and destructive. He used his financial resources to undercut competitors' prices until they faced bankruptcy, employed his political connections to create regulatory obstacles that favored his operations while hampering rivals, and had been known to spread false information about competitors' products and business practices. Several promising merchants had been driven from the silk trade entirely through Giuliano's aggressive tactics, creating a market environment where most potential competitors chose safer, less profitable ventures rather than risk direct confrontation. Traditional approaches to this challenge would have involved either avoiding direct competition with Giuliano by focusing on different market segments or attempting to match his unethical tactics through equally questionable means. But Alessandro realized that both approaches were fundamentally flawed. Avoiding competition would limit his growth potential indefinitely, while matching unethical tactics would make him vulnerable to the same reputational and legal risks that could ultimately destroy any merchant who relied on such methods. Instead, Alessandro developed a strategy based on achieving complete competitive victory through superior value creation, innovative business practices, and systematic excellence that would make Giuliano's unethical advantages irrelevant, while positioning Alessandro as the clearly superior choice for every category of customer in Milan's silk market. The approach began with Alessandro's recognition that Giuliano's dominance was built on several vulnerabilities that could be exploited through legitimate competitive strategies. Giuliano's focus on price competition had led him to compromise on quality in ways that sophisticated customers were beginning to notice. His reliance on political connections created dependencies that could be undermined through superior customer relationships. Most importantly, his reputation for unethical behavior had created an underlying market demand for a trustworthy alternative that customers could feel confident supporting. Alessandro's strategy involved systematically addressing each aspect of the silk trade where Giuliano held advantages, not through matching his unethical tactics, but through developing superior approaches that would make those tactics ineffective while creating sustainable competitive advantages based on genuine value creation.
The first phase of Alessandro's campaign focused on product quality and supply chain innovation. While Giuliano competed primarily on price by accepting lower quality silk and cutting costs through reduced service, Alessandro invested heavily in developing relationships with the finest silk producers in Constantinople and Venice, creating supply agreements that guaranteed access to exceptional materials that were simply not available through Giuliano's cost-focused procurement methods. But Alessandro's innovation went beyond simply offering higher quality products. He developed quality assessment and certification procedures that allowed customers to understand exactly what they were purchasing, creating transparency that highlighted the superior value of his offerings, while making it obvious when competitors were selling inferior goods at artificially low prices. More importantly, Alessandro created custom-designed services that transformed silk purchasing from a simple commodity transaction into a collaborative process where customers could work with skilled artisans to create exactly the fabrics they envisioned for their specific projects. This service differentiation made price comparison with Giuliano's standardized offerings largely irrelevant, since Alessandro was providing capabilities that his competitors simply couldn't match. The market response was immediate and decisive. Customers who had been purchasing from Giuliano primarily because of his lower prices discovered that Alessandro's superior quality and custom services provided value that more than justified the premium pricing. More importantly, customers who had been reluctant to work with Giuliano because of his reputation for unethical behavior were eager to support a merchant whose business practices they could respect and recommend to their associates. The second phase of Alessandro's strategy involved systematic expansion into market segments, where Giuliano had established positions, but with innovative approaches that created entirely new categories of value that competitors couldn't easily replicate. Instead of simply trying to win existing customers through better terms or more aggressive marketing, Alessandro identified unmet needs in Milan's luxury market that could be addressed through creative applications of silk trade expertise. Alessandro developed partnerships with Milan's leading fashion designers and interior decorators, creating collaborative arrangements that provided these artisans with access to exclusive fabrics and design consultation, while generating new revenue streams that were completely independent of direct competition with Giuliano. These partnerships created a network of influential advocates who promoted Alessandro's services throughout Milan's cultural and social elite. More strategically, Alessandro began offering comprehensive textile consulting services to wealthy families who were furnishing palazzos or planning elaborate social events. These services combined fabric selection with design advice, project management, and ongoing maintenance support, creating long-term relationships that generated recurring revenue, while establishing Alessandro as an indispensable resource for Milan's most influential customers. The genius of this approach was that it transformed Alessandro from a silk merchant competing for individual transactions into a luxury lifestyle consultant whose expertise and relationships made him essential for anyone seeking the finest textile solutions. Customers who might have split their purchases between multiple suppliers found that Alessandro's comprehensive services made working with competitors unnecessarily complicated and less effective. The third phase of Alessandro's campaign involved demonstrating superior business ethics and community leadership in ways that highlighted the contrast with Giuliano's questionable practices, while building sustainable competitive advantages based on reputation and relationships. Instead of responding to Giuliano's unethical tactics with similar behavior, Alessandro used his competitor's poor reputation as an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of integrity and community commitment that Milan's business leaders truly valued. Alessandro became actively involved in Milan's merchant guild, volunteering for leadership positions and spearheading initiatives that improved business practices throughout the textile trade. He developed quality standards and ethical guidelines that helped legitimate merchants compete more effectively, while making it difficult for those who relied on deceptive practices to maintain their market positions. More importantly, Alessandro used his growing influence to create industry-wide improvements that benefited everyone except those who had been exploiting weaknesses in existing systems. He established trade practices that required transparent quality disclosure, promoted standardized contracts that protected both merchants and customers, and supported regulatory changes that leveled competitive playing fields while maintaining high standards for product quality and business conduct. These initiatives had the effect of systematically eliminating the advantages that Giuliano had gained through unethical practices, while creating an environment where Alessandro's superior approaches to quality, service, and relationship building provided clear competitive advantages that were difficult to challenge through questionable tactics. The culmination of Alessandro's strategy came during the crisis of 1403, when political upheaval following the death of Gian Galeazzo Visconti disrupted traditional trade relationships and created uncertainty throughout Milan's commercial community. While other merchants, including Giuliano, struggled to maintain their existing business in an environment where established advantages were suddenly unreliable, Alessandro's comprehensive approach to market development enabled him to thrive during the transition. The custom-designed services and consulting relationships that Alessandro had developed provided him with detailed knowledge of his customers' needs and planning processes, enabling him to anticipate demand changes and adjust his inventory and supply relationships accordingly. The quality standards and supplier relationships he had established gave him access to materials that became scarce as other merchants struggled with disrupted supply chains. Most importantly, the reputation for integrity and community leadership that Alessandro had built made him a trusted partner for customers and suppliers who were seeking reliable relationships during uncertain times. While Giuliano's reputation for unethical behavior made people reluctant to commit to long-term arrangements with him, Alessandro's demonstrated integrity made him the obvious choice for anyone seeking partnerships that could weather political and economic uncertainty. The market transformation was dramatic and complete. Within months of the political transition, Alessandro had captured the majority of Milan's luxury silk market, while Giuliano found himself relegated to competing for price-sensitive customers who were primarily interested in the lowest possible costs rather than quality or service. But Alessandro's victory was not just a matter of market share. It represented a fundamental restructuring of Milan's silk trade that made it virtually impossible for Giuliano to recover his previous position through any means, ethical or otherwise. Alessandro had not simply defeated his competitor, he had created a market environment where the tactics that had made Giuliano successful were no longer effective, while establishing sustainable advantages that would be extremely difficult for any competitor to challenge. The quality standards and certification processes that Alessandro had developed became industry norms that made it difficult to compete successfully with inferior products. The custom-designed services and consulting relationships created customer loyalty that went far beyond simple price competition. The reputation for integrity and community leadership provided Alessandro with access to opportunities and partnerships that were not available to merchants whose ethics were questionable. More importantly, Alessandro's comprehensive approach to market development had created what modern business strategists would recognize as multiple moats, competitive advantages that were self-reinforcing and difficult to replicate. Competitors who wanted to challenge Alessandro would need to simultaneously match his quality standards, service capabilities, supplier relationships, and reputation for integrity, a combination that required years of consistent effort and substantial investment. Giuliano's response to his defeat demonstrated the completeness of Alessandro's victory. Unable to compete effectively through his traditional methods, Giuliano was forced to either adopt more ethical business practices or exit the Milan market entirely. He chose to relocate his operations to smaller cities where competition was less sophisticated, essentially conceding the most profitable market in northern Italy to Alessandro. The long-term impact of Alessandro's victory extended beyond his immediate business success to influence the evolution of Milan's entire commercial culture. His demonstration that superior value creation and ethical business practices could achieve more decisive competitive victories than unethical tactics encouraged other merchants to adopt similar approaches, creating a business environment that rewarded innovation and integrity while making questionable practices less effective. The quality standards and industry practices that Alessandro had promoted became embedded in Milan's textile trade, creating systematic advantages for merchants who competed through legitimate means while establishing barriers that made it difficult for those who relied on unethical tactics to establish successful operations. The city's reputation for producing exceptional textiles and maintaining high standards of business conduct attracted customers and suppliers from throughout Europe, creating opportunities that benefited all legitimate participants in the trade. But perhaps most importantly, Alessandro had demonstrated that complete competitive victory could be achieved through methods that strengthened rather than weakened the overall business environment. His success had not come at the expense of market health or community welfare, but through innovations and improvements that created value for everyone involved, while eliminating only those practices that had been harmful to long-term market development. Years later, when Alessandro had become one of Milan's most respected merchants, and his methods had influenced commercial practices throughout northern Italy, he would reflect on the principles that had guided his systematic victory over seemingly superior competition. The key insight he had learned was that complete victory, achieved through ethical means, was more sustainable and valuable than partial victories achieved through questionable tactics. Competition, Alessandro would tell younger merchants who sought his guidance, is not about destroying others, but about creating value that makes alternatives irrelevant. When you provide what customers truly need, better than anyone else can, you achieve victories that cannot be challenged because they are based on genuine superiority rather than temporary advantages. This philosophy had proven effective not just in specific competitive situations, but as a general approach to building sustainable business success in any environment where long-term thinking and community relationships were more valuable than short-term tactical advantages. Alessandro had discovered that the most complete victories were those that improved the entire competitive environment while establishing unassailable positions based on genuine value creation. In our modern world of global competition and rapid technological change, this medieval wisdom has never been more relevant or more powerful. We live in an age where businesses can achieve unprecedented competitive advantages through innovation and superior value creation, but where unethical tactics can also cause more damage than ever before to both competitors and entire industries. The most successful companies and leaders of our time are those who have learned to apply the same principles that guided Alessandro over 6 centuries ago. They understand that complete competitive victory comes not through destroying competitors, but through creating value propositions that make alternatives irrelevant while strengthening the overall market environment. This approach requires long-term thinking, substantial investment in capability development, and commitment to ethical practices that serve all stakeholders rather than just immediate competitive interests. But it creates sustainable advantages that are far more valuable than any tactical victories achieved through questionable means, because they are based on genuine superiority that competitors must match through legitimate innovation rather than simply counter through their own unethical tactics. Whether you're building a business, developing professional capabilities, or simply trying to achieve your objectives in competitive environments, the principles of ethical complete victory remain as powerful today as they were in medieval Milan. Focus on creating genuine value that others cannot easily replicate. Develop sustainable advantages through superior service and innovation. And remember that the most decisive victories are those that make competition irrelevant rather than simply defeating specific competitors. For in the marble-columned markets of Milan, Alessandro Torriani learned that true victory is not about conquering enemies, but about achieving such clear superiority through legitimate means that competition becomes unnecessary. And in that mastery lies a timeless secret of sustainable success. When you become genuinely indispensable through ethical excellence, you achieve victories that last because they are based on value that everyone benefits from, rather than destruction that ultimately weakens everyone involved.